It's summer, and that means I'm deep into the middle of my State of Indie reviews. I'd like to go over a few of the more interesting observations, a few of the more common observations, as well as some standouts. But before we do that, I do want to put a call out to anyone watching this who happens to be a developer. If you are releasing a game in 2025, if you had one come out or you have one planned, you are eligible to take my survey and to be in the article and in the video. I have a pretty broad definition of what entails a game coming out. So, first release, a game coming out of early access, DLC for an existing game. Honestly, I'd even take something like an open beta. Does not need to be a commercial project. If you've got something that's just free and floating around, if you meet any of these qualifications, please, by all means, go into the comments. You will find a link to a little survey, and I would love to hear from you. Now, on to the survey responses thus far. Some of this stuff is really not surprising. I asked people, for example, what do you think the greatest challenge is for small developers? Which is the same answer every year I've done this. Competition, overcrowding, between 18 and 20,000 games released on Steam, and that's the problem. There's just too many out there. Sure, it's kind of what everybody says, but I was getting some more interesting, some more kind of disagreement, especially in the related question, which was what is the greatest advantage that small developers have? And I got a lot of different answers to that, but I think maybe the most amusing set of answers were the ones who said that the biggest advantage to being a small developer is just that you are not a large developer. Obviously, not a lot of love towards AAA companies or the games they are releasing. So quite a few people kind of pointed out things related to that. For example, here's one from a representative from Amistec Games. Being a small developer today is the biggest opportunity itself. Large corporations can never compete with the agility and pool of ideas. In fact, the gap has even grown the last few years in favor of small developers. The open possibilities of all sorts of unexplored ideas, speed of prototyping, clear focus, and passion for the subject is what thrives and should thrive in small developer scene. Kind of caught up in there is this notion of innovation. The idea of it is that one of the big advantages to being the little guy is that you don't have to sell millions of copies. You're not expected to sell millions of copies. You're not expected to have these ideas that are going to be popular with everyone. You're not expected to reach out to this mass audience. You can focus a little more. And here's another comment to that effect from Zero Sun. There are a lot of untapped or unserviced niches ripe for the picking. For example, our most recent game was a roguelike, which is normally thought of as a crowded genre, but in actuality, it is a strategy RPG with roguelike elements, which created a unique experience. This is fundamentally what interests me about these games. If you've watched any of my reviews, and I know not everyone who watches these kind of videos has seen any of the reviews, my focus tends to be on innovation and novelty. I quite deliberately focus on what is interesting, what is unique, what this developer is doing that has not been done before, or what twists they have thrown into the basic formula. And some people, I know some of my detractors have complained about that. There are people who are more used to maybe more specialist reviewers who are expecting me to go really deep into the reeds and talk about how tight are the controls compared to these other 5 games, and where do they rank on that? And how is the upgrade tree compared to other games? That's just not interesting to me. Honestly, when I request a game to review, the single worst thing, the nightmare scenario for me, where I end up spending, 3 weeks toiling over it and then write a really generic review, tends to be when the game itself is kind of generic, when it's just, a maybe good example of an existing style, but just a standard example of an existing style. And I think that with everything being as crowded as it is right now, you need to bring something more to the table. You need to offer something more than just being a good example of something that people have seen 100 times already. These days, if you to be make a twin stick shooter with above average controls and design, I mean, that's just not going to cut it. You have to have a USP. So I've taught a little bit of business English. You have to have a unique selling point, and quite a few people did mention something to that effect. But moving back to that idea of getting noticed, quite a few people talked about one of the most dreaded topics in this field, marketing. Here from Roger Gassman, I'm no expert, but over time I've met many small development teams. The biggest problem seems to be marketing. 1, they lack the knowledge of how to market, and 2, it's extremely neglected. I've seen so many exciting game concepts over time that will never make it because they can't or don't advertise them. I'll add a few more things to that in addition to those two we identified. Three, most of these people hate marketing. If you go over to like small developer, especially like the indie game dev subreddits, every so often someone will just complain, why is everyone talking about marketing all the time? And there's this whole just make a good game, just make a good game and it'll succeed. And a lot of people really want to believe that's true. Point three, they hate it. Point four, they don't necessarily know how to do it. Like one of the reasons these sessions are so common is that people are following just the standard advice and it's not working for them and it doesn't seem to be working for anyone. So they're trying to find out what's going to work. Like some people have found that Reddit ads work really well for them. Some people find that Reddit ads are useless. Ads on different platforms. Some people find that advertising doesn't work at all for them. Some people have great relationships with content creators. Some have terrible relationships with content creators. They get nothing out of it. Like it's just all over the map, and it's very, very frustrating when there's no real roadmap for this. Some interesting observations along those lines from Joshua Meadows. Other people seem to build audiences with social media streaming and TikTok or YouTube, but that seems like investing more time and resources into building a following there instead of directing it toward the thing you're actually trying to make. I don't personally have a lot of interest in trying to cultivate a Twitch audience or Discord community that I then have to engage with, monitor, and manage to hopefully be able to leverage it into attention for my game/writing/art. Other people seem to manage this, so no knock against them, but it doesn't appeal to me. The second he said these things, I immediately start thinking about some of the things I've heard from musicians. I've mentioned before, I follow advice that is meant for musicians because they are kind of the canary in the coal mine in this sense. Because whatever horseshit musicians are dealing with right now, the rest of us will have to deal with eventually, probably just in a few years. And so you hear what they're talking about and the advice for them and the complaints that they make, and it's kind of like looking into your own future. And if at all familiar with like the music scene today, TikTok was kind of starting a couple years ago, became kind of the great white hope for musicians. This idea that that's where you're going to get noticed. You're going to show up in some, little video or some like Instagram reel that really blows up and that's going to launch your career. And it's what everybody wanted. But now you see the people who are doing this, have really committed themselves to TikTok or YouTube Shorts. And what you're discovering from a lot of these people is they're saying that they've accrued an audience on that platform, but it has not made their music any more popular because what they're doing is not mostly music anymore. Some of these musician accounts you look at, you're expecting to see them playing the songs. You're expecting to see music videos, live footage, playthroughs, tutorials, things of that nature. I look at some of these and they're doing stunts. They're doing sketch comedy. They're doing top tens. They're doing quote unquote social experiments. They're doing like man on the street interviews, the whole short form pick and mix. And some of them have accrued an audience for that, but it has not improved. It hasn't resulted in them getting more attention on their music. I've seen some of these people, some of these musicians are getting, audiences, 6-figure, 7-figure audiences, most of whom do not know that they are in bands. It's incredible. And I've seen that already happening with video games too. I saw there's a post on Reddit, because again, I follow all the little like indie developer subreddits. One of them said that was kind of showing his wish lists over time and the different things that he'd done that contributed to them. And he had a post he wrote that went viral. And you can see that there's this giant spike in attention to his like Steam page and almost no new wish lists because it went viral among developers who were not necessarily looking for a new game. I remember a few years back, I saw a developer did an unrelated video about like IO games. You remember that trend, these kind of like little online games you play in your browser, and how some of those are not online games. They're faking it with bots. And it popped off. It got millions of views. He just kind of casually mentioned at the end, oh yeah, I'm working on a game. Why don't you go check that out? Should be great, right? If he's getting millions of views, that should translate into some degree of success. I checked, because I didn't discover this video until after the game was already out. It only had like 11 reviews. Broad success did not translate into game success for these people because they were getting attention from the wrong audience. And this is one of the perpetual problems these days. It's why it drives me crazy when you hear the usual cheerleaders and the usual junky advice that just, oh, you should just use social media, as though that's the end all be all. But it's not that simple. First of all, you have to know how to accrue an audience on those platforms, and second of all, you need to know how to translate that audience into interest in whatever you care about. And even as someone who has on a couple of occasions said that I think short form video is starting to replace content creators for game discovery, I also kind of said that only certain games are really going to benefit from that. They do have to be these really simple games with really distinctive visuals that kind of pop out right away. And even then, I wonder if some of the games like that just aren't going to have success. People check them out, but then ultimately don't buy them. That's the other thing too. With games, you start off by translating them into wish lists, people saying, "Oh, I will definitely buy this eventually," but then you need to get them to actually convert from wish lists to purchases. I've known a lot of these developers, they'll have a game that gets a ton of wish lists and then just nobody buys it, and that ends up being their problem. So, yeah, discovery is, marketing, all very complex things that people complain about because they are very difficult and they are very confusing, but it's honestly even more confusing than you might think. So that's what I have for you for now. Again, if you have released a game in 2025 or are planning to release a game this year, please check in the comments. I've got a link to a form where you can take the survey. I would love to hear from you. If that's not you, well, then see you later.